Hello everyone. This video is a follow-up on the videos number 8 and 9 concerning the mail architecture. This video is also here to answer a question of one of the viewers on how did I configure everything with Synology and Sophos. So we're going to talk about some basic information about mail, some best practices, but not all of them because there are a lot. I'm going to talk about the mail confidentiality, the protocols, and some authentication techniques like SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. I'm going also to present my architecture and configuration with Synology and Sophos. And with the SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, I'm going to show you how I have configured everything for my domain and talk about SMIME a little bit. So it's going to be quite a long video this time. So the Mail Plus Server package allows you to have a full or partial mail server. On my side, I'm only using it partially because I'm not receiving SMTP connection from other servers on the internet, and I cannot make SMTP connections to the internet to outside mail servers because the ISP is blocking it. Mail servers are interesting targets for hackers because it allows them to abuse your server to send spam and phishing, usually through bad configurations like open relay, unauthenticated service, SMTP service, or compromised accounts. And are going to abuse your domain, they're going to spoof your domain for spam and phishing campaigns. They also could retrieve some emails and contact information, so to steal information about you. And they could also leverage the mail service to gather some information about you or your configuration, your infrastructure. And this is usually done in reconnaissance and enumeration attack phases. So the mail traffic could also be compromised to gather technical data like users and passwords, and mail content with man-in-the-middle attacks, comment stripping with the STARTTLS attack that we're going to see after. So some of the best practices, but not all of them, it's always to disable unused mail protocols. If you don't use POP3, just disable POP3. Use only the secure versions of the protocols in order for you to avoid loss of integrity or confidentiality. Avoid directly exposing the mail services of the NAS to the complete internet. If possible, maybe use some relays or smart host, for example. Set up SMTP authentication, disable open relay, or use authenticated relays, or if open relay is necessary, just make some IP whitelisting to restrict who can connect. Create a DNS-A and MX record for the sending mail server so that the mail.local will resolve to the IP address, and create a pointer DNS record for the IP of the sending mail server so that the IP address resolves to the mymail.local FQDN. And you also have to have a pointer DNS hostname that must match the SMTP banner hostname that is configured on your mail server. This is one of the first anti-spam techniques that should use Google or Yahoo, for example. If it cannot resolve back, well, then you will be considered as a spammer. You should also use SPF, DKIM, and DMARC as authentication mechanisms, so you could have a better reputation and better delivery that we will talk after. And on your side, always use anti-spam, antivirus, network intrusion prevention system, etc. And there are a lot of other best practices. So in terms of confidentiality, emails shouldn't be used to transfer confidential information. Well, at least I would not transfer this kind of information, not just like that. The data, well, will transit and get stored to various places on which you don't have any control. Like, your mailbox can be compromised, the recipient mailbox could be compromised, your mail server or the recipient mail server could be compromised, the intermediate servers could be also, and there could be eavesdropping of the traffic all along the way. So what we can do to help ensure better confidentiality where you don't control everything, you could use encrypted protocols first. So, so you have data encryption in transit. Maybe send confidential data in an encrypted zip folder, so you can have, data at rest encryption. You could use SMIME or PGP for encryption of data at rest. And if you have a Synology, you could use probably some sharing links with authentication or not. That will allow you not to have the confidential information stored in a place that you do not trust. Unfortunately, the Synology mail folder can't be encrypted, and PGP encryption feature doesn't encrypt attachments. So this is quite sad that you cannot encrypt your folder if your NAS breaks down or someone steals your NAS or your hard disk. Maybe you're gonna throw it out. Well, unfortunately, the email will be stored in clear text. Now, in terms of network security, you're going to deal with different kind of protocols, like the HTTP protocol for the webmail access if you're using it, the POP protocol for mail retrieving, IMAP for mail synchronization, and SMTP for mail submission or transfer. So the mail submission is used between the client and the server, and the transfer between the mail servers. So we've got three kinds of configuration. We've got the clear text protocols, the implicit SSL, and the explicit TLS with STARTTLS command. So here you have the different ports. For the implicit SSL, SMTP is the port 465. This one technically shouldn't be used because it's not an official protocol anymore. It is deprecated. So you should use the port with the explicit TLS, the 587. But of course, there are some differences between the implicit and explicit. Implicit, it is encrypted, and that's all. Explicit, it's not encrypted. You can upgrade the connection to an encrypted version, and but unfortunately, there are some drawbacks with this technique. So for the implicit version, the advantages are, well, the encrypted channel is mandatory, which is good for security. The disadvantages is that the port 465 is deprecated, and dedicated encrypted ports could be blocked to force you to use the unencrypted ports or explicit ports to strip TLS attack in order to eavesdrop on the connection. For the explicit version, the encrypted channel is optional, which is good for compatibility because you're using the same port. But the drawback is that the start of the connection is in clear text, and this is vulnerable to a strip TLS attack where you're going to strip the STARTTLS command. So the upgrade is not possible. But you could configure your client and server manually to force the use of the encryption. And also self-signed certificate can be used, which is maybe not the best thing to do. Now there are also a way to upgrade everything, which is the SMTP Mail Transfer Agent Strict Transport Security, which is a little bit like the STS for HTTP. So this is going to allow mail providers to declare their ability to the other SMTP server to use an encrypted channel. This is done through a DNS text record and policy, a policy file that is served through an HTTPS web server. And for that, you need a valid and signed certificate, and it will be used for authentication and then after to encrypt the connection. This is based on the trust on first use model, which means that the first time a SMTP server is going to connect to another SMTP server, it's going to retrieve this certificate and it will store the fingerprint, in a local cache. And during the further connection, the certificate will be checked against this local reference. It can be configured to avoid transferring to mail servers not using encryption. This is not 100% safe, because as for the STS, if during the first initial connection ever to the other server there is a problem, then the connection could be compromised. And for DANE, it's for DNS-based authentication of named entities. This offers the highest security and uses DNSSEC. I don't really know about it, so I'm not going to talk about it. It's just good to know that there is something that can ensure security, but is not widely used so far. Well, we always got some usual mail problem. It's, you would have a problem where someone is spoofing your domain for, a spam or phishing campaign. This will bring you some problems because on the long run, you might have some legitimate mail on your site that will get undelivered because your domain or maybe some of your IPs will get listed or will have a low reputation. And depending on the anti-spam setting on your recipient side, you might, the emails might get blocked. It's quite difficult to identify legitimate email from, forged addressed email. But for that, we can use the SPF, DKIM, and DMARC that will help the recipient to identify legitimate emails, and this will improve your delivery by using those email authentication methods. So SPF, Sender Policy Framework. This is an email authentication method that is path-based. So that means that you need to check from where the email came from. The domain owners specifies which servers are authorized to send emails for your domain. You just need to have a DNS text entry in your DNS server. It allows the receiving mail server, if configured to do so, to check that the email came from an approved server identified by the domain administrator and declared in this SPF record. So the receiver is going to look at the mail from address to retrieve the domain. So the mail from is the return path address or the envelope from. It's going to make a DNS query for that domain to retrieve that SPF record. And it's going to check if the IP address, so the sender IP address, the X originating IP used to send the email, is declared in the SPF record. So this is here to help detect and block email spoofing with your domain. But depending on your SPF parameter and the receiver SPF settings, the mail can be delivered, quarantined, or rejected. And you might not have any feedback if the email get ever rejected. We're going to have an example of that later in the video. For the limitations, if you use SPF alone, it may be difficult to maintain because some IPs or hosts may be missing when you configure it. IPs or hosts may be added in your mail infrastructure in the future because you've got new servers, new IPs, you're going to migrate stuff, and maybe you are delegating some email to your partners. So not all receivers will base their decisions solely on the SPF record check, and the SPF breaks when the email is forwarded. SPF check is performed on an invisible field to the user, so this will not really help the user. And it will not protect if the display name, so the from field, is the one that is spoofed. So the from is the one that any kind of user will see directly when opening an email. And it is not efficient with mutualized environment because you have a provider that is going to, to have the mail infrastructure of everyone for another domain, and this domain can send an email on my behalf, and the SPF check will be okay because we don't have any means to say that this server is responsible for my domain because it is mutualized. So this is not the best scenario. Then we've got DKIM, which stands for Domain Keys Identified Mail. So this time the email authentication method is signature based and designed to detect domain spoofing and message altering. It also adds non-repudiation. So if an email is sent through your domain, well, you are responsible for the content of this email because it was authorized for your domain. It allows the receiving mail server, again, if configured to do so, to verify if the email sent from a domain was indeed authorized by the domain owner. It's going to be able to see if the email was altered or not. And it's going to use public key cryptography, so a public and private key pair. And the public key is going to be stored in a DNS text record, and the private key has to stay, well, private and undisclosed. The sending server is going to attach a DKIM signature to the email. So it's going to create a header and a body hash. It's going to sign the computed result with the private key, and therefore the header and the body will be protected from altering, but also it has its limitation. Now, the domain key signature will be verified by the receiving server. So the receiving server will take the email, it's going to create its own headers and body hashes. It's going to search for the domain, which is in the D parameter of the signature. It's going to make a DNS request for this domain. It's going to ask for the S selector record name, and this selector record is used to locate the key in your DNS. And it's going to retrieve this public key, and this public key will be used to decrypt the signature, and it will give us the original hashes that were computed by the sender. And if the result of step 1 equal the one of step 5, well, there is a match, and the signature and authenticity is valid and confirmed. And we'll see an example after. DKIM has its own limitations. Not all parts of the email are signed, so it might be vulnerable to a replay attack where we're going to add some extra fields, and the email will be forwarded and the signature will still be valid. The DKIM verification also has to be enabled by the receiving end. It does not tell the receiver what to do if the verification fails. It does not tell the sender of the results of the verification and if the email was delivered or blocked, and the user is not aware of the results. Now, for DMARC. DMARC is domain-based message authentication, reporting, and conformance. It is an authentication protocol to protect against spoofing of the display from address. So this is what the user will see. The policy is stored in a DNS text record that the receiver will fetch. It's going to leverage the already existing technology of SPF and DKIM as authentication mechanisms, and therefore the mail will be authenticated by the receiving mail server with those techniques. It specifies to the receiver which authentication mechanism is used, SPF, DKIM, or both. It allows the sender to tell the receiver what to do with the email depending on the SPF and DKIM check results, but the receiver can apply a different policy if it wants to. So we have three kinds of what we call disposition. We have the none, the quarantine, and the reject. Okay, so the quarantine goes to the spam folder, the none is more for a report, and the reject was going to reject the email. The disposition is what the receiver is gonna do, what the receiver did with your email. So we have actually two kinds of important things here. First thing, to tell the person, the receiver, what to do with your email. So this is the P field. And then on the reports that we're gonna see, the disposition means what it did with your email. Okay, so maybe you will see that it complied with your parameter, or maybe not. And you can request the DMARC compatible receivers to send feedback reports, and we will have an example after. So when the server is going to receive the email, it's going to use the DNS to look up for the DMARC policy for the domain found in the display from address. And the DNS record has to start with _DMARC. Two important things with DMARC is going to do two things. It's going to authenticate and to check the authentication and the domain alignment. So the authentication for SPF, it just checks that the sender IP address is in the SPF record. For the DKIM, it checks that the DKIM signature is valid. Now for the domain alignment, it's going to take the from address and take the domain as a reference for comparison. So for SPF, it's going to check if this from domain equals domain found in the return path field. For DKIM, it's going to check if this from domain is the same as the domain found in the DKIM D parameter in the signature. And there are two modes for the alignment: strict, where the domains must exactly match, or relaxed, using a subdomain. If you use a subdomain, it will also align. Now for the DMARC result. So I found this sentence: to pass DMARC, a message must pass SPF authentication and SPF alignment, and or DKIM authentication and DKIM alignment. So one of them is enough. A message will fail DMARC if the message fails both SPF or SPF alignment and DKIM or DKIM alignment. So for the first part of this paragraph, we have those first three DMARC results and the last one. This is what the first sentence means. For the second one, I think that I understood that those are all the scenarios where the DMARC check would fail. Now, DMARC helps to detect and block fake email with domain spoofing, with spam and phishing campaigns spoofing your domain. It adds confidence that your email will be delivered, as it will be considered more legitimate because you have a better domain reputation and better delivery because you are using those authentication techniques. It gives the sender visibility on how the receivers process the emails through reports. It will help you discover if people are abusing from your domain, so spoofing it. But of course, this only works if the receiver uses DMARC for mail verification and if it is configured to send you reports. There are some general limitations anyway. Hackers could be sending a malicious email from a compromised domain, server, or account. So, well, this is of no use. Hacker could use a domain that utilizes SPF DKIM and DMARC, so this will just give him a better visibility, but, well, again, this is a little flaw. And the receivers could not respect your settings. Now, for my infrastructure, so this is how I work on my side. So you have my DNS provider, where I have my SPF DKIM and DMARC record that we will see later. We have my OVH mail provider, my Sophos box, which I use the reverse proxy, WAF, network antivirus, network intrusion prevention system, the POP3 proxy, SMTP proxy, SMIME, and DKIM. And we have my NAS. Here it is important to see two kinds of SMTP scenarios. We have the first one where my device is going to use the integrated mail software. So the mail software of the Windows 10, the mail software of the macOS, and for example, the mail software of the iOS device. And those will be configured to use SMTPS and IMAP. So for the SMTPS, the connection will go to the UTM box and it will relay the email directly to the email provider. The second scenario is we're going to use the WEBMAIL or the DS-Mail application. So you will have a first connection which will be in HTTP, which will be reverse proxied and protected with the WAF, the network antivirus, and the network intrusion prevention system, and you will reach then the mail server package on the NAS on its designated HTTPS port. So if you would like then to send an email, it's going to initiate a SMTP connection to the Sophos, which is some kind of a relay here. It will be protected, with different techniques, and then it will be authenticatedly sent to the OVH provider. And we have also the POP3 scenario where we have the NAS that is going to retrieve all the emails stored in my provider. So everything here will be, break down after. So why this so complicated architecture? Different reasons. First of all, it's not to expose my NAS directly onto the internet, as I'm not really fond of a system doing multiple things, like, email, data, and a lot of stuff. I would like to use a UTM device to handle all the security and some mail functionalities. I also do not want to pay a higher internet provider subscription because I would need a fixed IP. If I would like to have a full mail server, I would need a fixed IP. I would need to unlock the outgoing SMTP25 port, which could be blocked which is blocked by my ISP. And I would need to have a reverse DNS entry, and for that I would need to check with my ISP also. Now, to have a better availability, if any any components of my infrastructure, my NAS, my UTM, they are unavailable because of a reboot, a crash, or because I'm changing IP or moving somewhere else, of course, I may not be able to access my old emails, but I still can send and receive from, directly with my mail provider. So at least I can still use it. Now for the mail sync and mail read feature. I'm using, here, what you're going to see here is the topology, the Sophos rules, and the Synology rules, the Synology configuration, and my mail client configuration. So as you can see here with IMAP-S, with my devices, with the integrated mail client, it's going to be a direct connection directly from my devices to my Sophos bot, to my NAS. So we have this direct connection to my NAS with the IMAP-S port. The IMAP traffic can't be reverse proxied, so it's a direct connection. In my firewall rule, I have, so I'm authorizing the internet to connect to my NAS with the IMAP-S port. I have also a country blocking restriction, which is that only France and Switzerland is able to connect to the NAS with this service. And we have the application control rule, which we say that, I'm authorizing the mail protocols to be used in my network. I would have preferred to say that I only would like to allow the IMAP traffic, but Sophos does not recognize the IMAP-S traffic. It only recognizes it as a SSL traffic. So it's more in the web browsing category. Anyway, in this Synology, I'm going to enable the IMAP SSL and TLS because anyway, it's on the implicit port. And I'm going to prohibit plain text authentication over unencrypted connections. Now for the firewall on the Synology, I'm saying that anywhere in the world I can connect to my 993 port, but with the protection, the country protection of the Sophos device, it will anyway only be from France and Switzerland. I could have done the same configuration here, but there is no point. And here I'm saying that I'm going to specifically use the 993 port for the IMAP traffic, and I'm saying that the encryption is mandatory. Now, if I'm using not the built-in clients, but the DSMail application or the WEBMAIL application of the Synology package, so I'm going to use an HTTPS connection, which will break here, and which will terminate here, and there will be some kind of protection, as I said before, to analyze the network flow. And then, as you can see here, it's only for HTTPS connections. It will be redirected to the 8016 port, which is the port of the package. I'm going to apply a web application firewall rule, which will block XSS attacks, SQL-based attacks, command-based attacks, Trojans, and etc., etc. And again, only France and Switzerland is able to connect to the reverse proxy. And for the Synology firewall, I'm only stating that the reverse proxy is able to connect to the Synology application port. Now, for the mail retrieval, as I said, as no one is sending, if someone from an external domain sends me an email, the email will be stored on the OVH server. So I need my NAS to retrieve those stored emails. So as you can see, my NAS has the POP3 retrieval function, which will then end up to the connection will terminate in the POP3 proxy. It's going to intercept the user password, and it's going to connect on his behalf to the OVH mailbox of this user. So in terms of mail server package, no, this is the mail package you need to configure for your user, your email address, your mail provider, the POP3 service, the POP3 address, the POP3 service, the username, the password, and here I'm just stating that everything has to be secured with the encrypted protocols. And I'm also stating here that I would like to suppress or delete the original emails that are stored on the OVH server. This is for privacy and confidentiality reasons. I do not want my emails to get stored in a place I do not have control. And here I have the anti-spam feature, which is deactivated in the Mail Server Plus package because it's not compatible with the POP3 retrieval function. And for the antivirus, I think that it's not compatible with the POP3 service, but at least it checks if I'm sending a virus to someone. I'm not sure if it is able to analyze incoming traffic. I forgot the test I did 2 years ago. Now for the POP3 proxy in the email protection feature of the Sophos box, you can say who is allowed to use the POP3 proxy, which is the NAS. I'm going to have the antivirus which is activated, and I'm going to quarantine everything that is not scannable or encrypted, and I'm going to block some extensions. For the anti-spam feature, it's activated, so at least maybe the NAS is not able to make the anti-spam feature, but the POP3 proxy of Sophos can. And here for the settings, it's just to say that if someone creates a connection with this FQDN, it's going to intercept the traffic. And then I'm going to delete quarantine email from the server too, because I have no use of leaving them there. Now, SMTPS with standard mail softwares. So as I said before, with the integrated mail features. So the scenario is I'm going to have an SMTPS connection going to my Sophos box, and the email will be then relayed to the OVH email provider. As you can see, there is nothing that has to be done with the NAS. So I'm just activating the SMTP proxy. I'm going to reject malware during SMTP transaction, but as I am the only one making those SMTP transactions, it's just going to be sure that I'm not sending viruses to someone. But also it's good that if someone maybe is able to break my password or is trying to use my system as a relay, it will reject malware, and it will also block spam. So, of course, I do not want anyone to use my Sophos box as a relay, so that means that I need to specifically allow some users. So this is an SMTP authenticated relay, not open relay. I'm going to scan the relayed messages for viruses, and I'm going to apply a TLS certificate, okay? Because it is very important that wherever I am in the world, if I'm going to use my phone with the standard application, the standard mail software, I would like to have a secure connection. And for that, you need to have a valid certificate. At least mine is signed by a trusted certification authority. I'm not sure this is mandatory, but the domain and the date has to be valid. And as you can see down is the, I'm requiring the TLS negotiation for my email. And as you can see now on the server side, I am forcing the secure connection, and on the client side here, as I am using the explicit service, I'm going to be sure that my client is using the is checking that the connection is secured with the SSL protocol. Okay, so the STARTTLS has to work. The combination of both those settings should protect me against the strip TLS attack, command attack. So now for the other part of the configuration, I have to configure on my SMTPS proxy on Sophos the SMTP host name, because my client devices are going to check this host name. Then, as you can see here, I'm using the my mail provider as a smart host, which is going to communicate on the explicit port of the SMTPS, and it requires authentication because, of course, the mail provider is not an open relay, so I need to authenticate myself to send my email. So I have created in my mail provider, I have created this special user, and it will be sent from this address. But at the end, for my recipient, he will see my real email address in the from field, not this one. This is just to relay the email. And as usual here, so we have the country restriction for the SMTPS traffic. Now for the SMTPS with the DS Mail application on the phone or the webmail with the web browser. So as you know, it is an HTTPS traffic, okay, that will be reverse proxied, and we have the WAF, network antivirus, and IPS protection, and the traffic will be redirected to the NAS. And then the NAS will make the SMTPS connection to the UTM proxy, which will then relay it to the mail provider. So as you can see here, we have the, I think like before, we have the reverse proxy entry with the WAF rules. We have the country blocking restriction for the reverse proxy, and we have on the Synology firewall, we have the reverse proxy that is authorized to communicate with the port of the Mail Server Plus package. Then here on my NAS, as I told you, my NAS has to communicate with the Sophos device. So here I have configured the relay host, which is here my Sophos box with the SMTPS port. It has to be secured, and also it is authenticated, so there is no, because I have no open relay on my Sophos box. And on the SMTP configuration, I have to configure it because I need to send emails. I may not receive it, but I have to send. And this is just a little one just to show you my SMTP configuration with the Mail Plus server package, where it's only, you know, the fact that I am using SMTP authentication, but this is of no use because I'm not receiving SMTPS connection on the NAS. But it's just to show you that I have activated authentication. If one day I need to take the box, the Sophos box, out of the way, this I will need. And I will not go through this again because it's the same configuration that we have seen before. It's just to say that still this has to be done and configured. Now, the sender policy framework. You as a sender that is going to send emails, so you have to create a DNS text entry in your DNS, and this is my SPF record, okay? And this, what you see here on the first line, it is the same thing than the second line, because the include means that we're going to include the SPF record of the domain as valid sending sources. So it's going to check the SPF record of this domain. This is necessary on my side because I am in a mutualized infrastructure at my email provider. So I cannot specifically put some servers or IP addresses. Now for the pointer entry, it defines the reverse hostname of the sending IP address as a valid sending source. The IPv4 is defined the IPv4 address as valid sending sources. And the all at the end, it should be at the end, it's the default policy for all sources that aren't part of the sender policy framework entry. So when it's a -all, so it's servers that are not listed in the record are not authorized to send email, and therefore it should be rejected. For the tilde, it's a soft fail. If the email is received from a server that isn't listed, the email can be accepted but should be marked as spam. And for the interrogation all, it's a neutral, no policy applied, so I'm not really sure what, why you would do that, maybe for testing purposes. And we have the +all, which means that any server is able to send email from your domain, and this is absolutely not recommended. And as it is a DNS entry, you have to add a TTL. If you're making some tests, you can put a low TTL. If you are sure of what you do, maybe put it at 24 hours TTL. SPF for you as a receiver. So on the Mail Plus Server package security authentication tab, you can enable SPF verification, and you can also reject if you have a soft mail. So already here you are taking over the policy of the sender. Instead of being in the spam, it will be rejected. On the Sophos device, the email protection SMTP anti-spam, you can have a perform SPF check. But here it seems that you cannot override anything. Now for the SPF check and result. So the receiver is going to check the email header. It's going to take the return path and it's going to extract the domain. And it's going to look at the sender or the originating IP. For example, here you have the X originating IP or the received from here. And if the IP is in the SPF record, you will have a SPF pass, which is the case here because the IP address, it is a permitted sender. Now for the authentication result, you have a special place when you use these authentication features, when you will have a place in the header where all the results will be put. So here you have all the summary of the email authentication checks, and in this case it will be here just the SPF pass that we are interested in. For DKIM, you as a sender, DKIM has you have to generate securely the DKIM key, and you have to rotate them regularly. If any case they get compromised, for example, you need to be able to regularly change them, like once every year, 2 years, or 3 years. It's very easy to do them anyway. The minimum key length is 1024 bits, but you should go with 2048 bits. You have to generate the key securely with OpenSSL or OpenDKIM, and don't use online services. You can for testing purposes, but not for production environment, because that means that your private key is already known by someone. Now for the DNS text record, how is it formatted? Okay, so we have the selector ._domain key.domain, this is your domain, and we have some other parameters. So this is my DKIM example. So my selector is my UTM. My domain is my domain.local. So you see the selector S, so this is my UTM, it is used to locate the key in the DNS. The domain D indicates the domain used for this selector, and it is the signing domain. We have the V, which is the version of DKIM, K for the key type, P for the public key, and H for the hashing algorithm. I have specified SHA-256, and so that means the signer and the receiver must support this hashing algorithm. T equal S, it enforces a strict domain match, so no subdomain allowed, in the signature header between the I tag and the D tag. So the D tag is your domain, your signing domain, and the I tag should handle your should have the domain of the email address that you see. So for the special part, my UTM _, domain key, this is actually like a subdomain. So when you're going to create this entry, this will be like a subdomain part of your domain. And as usual, TTL has to be defined. Now, so you as a sender, you have an example here of a signature attached by my system that created this signature when I send an email. And you have an extract of Wikipedia here, which says that the most important parameters here is the B for the digital signature, the BH for the body hash, the D for the signing domain, and the S for the selector. You can configure the Mail Plus Server package to create and to generate a DKIM key, but it's only a 124-bit. I don't understand why they didn't put a possibility to create a 2048 bit key, but anyway, you can do it here very easily, and it is secured. The private key cannot be extracted from the GUI, maybe from command line you can, but here you only have access to the public key, and you have to create also your selector prefix. On the Sophos device, if you would like to do it on the Sophos device and not on the UTM, then you cannot generate a DKIM key. You need to generate it elsewhere, and then you can put the private key in this field, the key selector, and to which domain this key should be applied on. Okay. Now, you as a receiver with DKIM on Synology in the authentication tab, you can enable DKIM verification of inbound emails, okay, and you can specify a minimum key length for DKIM verification because there is also lower than 1024. And you can also have a whitelist if you want. By this, I do not know what Synology will do if the signature fails. Anyway, I think that this settings has no effect on me. It was just enabled for the presentation, but usually it's disabled on my side. And on the Sophos, there is nothing to be configured that I have found. For the check and results, so in the receiving server will check the email header. It will find the DKIM signature. It's going to take the D parameter to make a DNS request and find the selector with the selector parameter, so to locate and retrieve the public key that is stored in the DNS. So it's going to create its own hashes of the different fields in the email. It's going to use the public key to decrypt the signature, so it will give us the original hashes that were computed by the sender. And if the result of step 1 equals result of step 2, well, that means that the signature is valid and the email is, authentic. And here you can have, again, the result is none, pass, fail, or policy, because probably the key is too short, for example, neutral, temporary, and permanent error. And you have a DKIM pass result here in the authentication result field. Okay, so DMARC, you as a sender, so you have to create a DNS text entry. And I'm going to break it down. It's for the DMARC version. The P and SP, we're going to ask the receiver to apply the policy to emails that fail the DMARC test for emails coming from domain, which is the P, or the subdomain. Now for the alignment. So the alignment, I have selected the strict for the SPF and for the DKIM. So alignment mode for the SPF. As you know, it's going to compare the domain in the from address of the sending user and compare it to the mail from, which is the return path address, the envelope address, the envelope from address. And it has to be a strict match between the two in this mode. If it's in the relaxed mode, you can use a subdomain. For DKIM, it's the same principle. It will compare the domain of the sender address, and it will compare it to the D parameter in DKIM. And it has to be strictly the same for the strict, and can be a subdomain for the relaxed. The percentage means that on my side, 100% of the messages I'm asking the receiver to apply this policy. Now for the error reporting policy, I've put it at 1 with the 1 value, which means that the report will be generated if either DKIM or SPF check fails. If it's the value 0, if only everything fails, you will receive it. And for the reporting interval, I have said I wanted it every hour, but the receiver can say no, it will be once every 24 hours. Then you've got the reporting address that you would like to have the report sent to, that we will see after. Now for the DMARC, you as a receiver. In the Synology, you have the Mail Plus Server package. On the Security and Authentication tab, you can enable DMARC. On Sophos, there is nothing that can be done. For the DMARC check and result, so it's going to check the received email header. It's going to find the domain in the from address. It's going to retrieve the DNS text DMARC record to check the policy. It's going to check the most important things, which is the SPF and DKIM authentication check, and it's going to verify the SPF and DKIM alignment. Then the DMARC actions can be overridden by the receiver if he wants to. Now for the authentication result, you have the DMARC, which is pass, okay, and the this disposition, which is known. So that means that the email passed. It was accepted. Now for the DMARC report. So the DMARC report, you can see here that we have the reporting organization, which is Google. We have the DMARC policy that Google retrieved for my domain, which is just here. So we see that we have my domain, the strict alignment mode for DKIM and the SPF, and the policy, which is to reject for the domain and subdomain if it does not succeed, and should apply to 100% of my emails. The sending source IP, so who sent the email, this is my OVH mail provider. The email count, so only one email was sent during this time frame from this IP. The disposition that got applied, so it passed. We have the SPF and DKIM authentication result plus alignment result, which is here, both passed. So here it means that the DMARC result is passed because at least one of the checks passed, but actually I've got both that passed. Now we got the identifier. So this is the from, the domain which is in the from field that the DMARC will take this as a reference. So it's mymail.local. And here we have the DKIM results. So first we have the DKIM domain. So this is the domain that was in the D parameter field. And this domain here will be used for the alignment check with the value of the DMARC domain. And we have the DKIM check result, which means that the signature was valid, and the selector. And then we've got the SPF domain check. So we have the SPF domain here, which is from the return path address domain, and it will be used for the alignment check with the one in the identifier. And we have the result of the SPF authentication, which is passed, which means that the IP was indeed authorized to send email from my domain. Now, the last topic, we've got SMIME. So it means Secure Multipurpose Internet Mail Extension. It can be used for mail encryption or signing. In my case, I'm using it for signing only. It's based on a public key cryptography, so a certificate will be needed. My email will be digitally signed to prove my identity to the user this time, so not to the infrastructure, but to the user, and that the message was unaltered, and there is non-repudiation. So I can't say it wasn't me, because if it was signed with my key, it means that it is me, unless, of course, my key got compromised. A hash of the email will be produced and signed, so encrypted, with the private key. The signature and certificate, so the public key, will be sent along the email so the recipient can check. This is only done for softwares that are compatible with SMIME. So that means, for example, Outlook on Windows and Mac, and also maybe Thunderbird and other software like that. But for webmails like Yahoo, for example, it's not compatible. You will have an attachment which is called smime.p7s, I think, something like that. So Sophos, on my side, Sophos will centrally produce all this work with the keys because it possesses the private and public key of my user. So I do not need to configure this key or SMIME on my devices, which is just great because I can change device, I can send email from anywhere in the world. It will have to go through my SMTPS proxy, and it will be automatically signed. If I don't do this centrally, that means that I have to configure all of my devices individually, and if I change devices, I need to reconfigure everything. So the recipient will produce the email hash on its side and compare it to the result of the decrypted signature through the use of the public key in the certificate, and see if everything is okay. If both hashes match, then all is okay. As I am a home user, I can't ask people to install my private root seer certificate in their key store because, well, it's complicated for some people, of course, and it's not practical at all. And so I'm using a paid certificate, which Root Certification Authority certificate is already in the Trusted Root Certification Authority of most computers' key stores. So this is just perfect. Now for the configuration here on Sophos, I can say that I would like to automatically sign every email for my user for which I have the keys automatically sign them. And we can see here that I have important the SMIME key, so the private key and public key in Sophos. Now this is just for example. Here we can see that I have sent a test email. So the only important here, the thing here is that we see that it was signed by, and we have the red ribbon here. If you click on it, you have you should have an object, but I sent a empty email actually. You have from who and signed by who, so by me. And if you click on the details, you can see that the signature is valid, so it was not modified after the signature. The certificate is not revoked. It's not. It's still valid, you know, in terms of date, and it is approved because it is a trusted. It was signed by a trusted root certificate authority. And if I would like to go further, I can just display the certificate. As you can see here, it was delivered to my email address. It was delivered by Sectigo, if you would like to have a SMIME certificate on your site. And this is the validity period. And you can see here the certification path. And Sectigo, it means that this one is in the trusted root certificate, and the Sectigo RSA, this one, the second one, should be in the intermediary key store. So that's it. I hope this video was informative for you. It was really just to show you some best practices, some recommendations to be sure that your email doesn't go into spam folder when you send some. That there are a lot of things that you should consider in terms of, you know, security and configuration. And if you'd like to go further, well, you can use you know, also the SMIME just to make sure that your email is still valid when the receiver receives it. So this is how I have configured everything. Of course, it was not in overnight. It was, you know, in multiple years. I have decided to implement more stuff to be more secure. And I just hope that this presentation was informative for you. Don't forget to like it if it was the case, and to subscribe. And if you have any questions, just don't hesitate to ask me in the comment section. Bye-bye.